Welcome to Payoff Pitch, Action Network's Major League Baseball betting podcast. I'm Mike Calabrese. In today's episode, we are going to wrap up our division previews with the AL East, and I am joined by our Major League Baseball betting expert, Sean Zerillo. Now, before we jump in, a bit of housekeeping on all the division previews. If you're listening now, you made it to the end of the road, but if you missed any of the episodes detailing AL East, NL East, Central, West, all of them under the sun, make sure to go back, listen through, and also go on over to Sean's articles that he's been updating in terms of all of his futures bets, his win totals. It's going to account for injury news, player movement, everything, so that you can have the best numbers possible and the best intel as well. And then also, we're going to have a long shot episode, a player prop episode, a look at the Japan series, plus an opening day preview, all coming soon. And a final reminder, during the season, you can count on us on Monday, Tuesday, and Friday mornings, giving out our best bets to keep you in the black throughout this Major League Baseball season. If you don't want to miss any of our Major League Baseball betting content, be sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, give us a 5-star review. We appreciate all the feedback, negative or positive. Just hit us with that 5-star review. And with that, Sean, let's jump into the AL East. We're going to start with last year's runner-up. They flamed out in the World Series, but other than that, kind of a banner year for the New York Yankees. 94 wins. Judge wins the AL MVP. Austin Wells finishes third in the AL Rookie of the Year voting as well. They are priced at just about even money, plus 105 to win the East, and their win total sitting at 91.5. Where do you come down on the pinstripes here in 2025?
Yeah, this is the team to mention that I will be updating numbers on actionnetwork.com for, because over the weekend we had the Garrett Cole injury news. It seems like he's going to miss the year with Tommy John surgery. He's still going to get a second opinion. I think you could probably at this point assume Garrett Cole is going to miss the year. And Giancarlo Stanton, dealing with tennis elbow in both elbows, probably very unlikely to play a significant portion of this season. Luis Heel, arm injury in spring training, unlikely to play for at least a couple months, if not miss more significant time than that. And it's just another reminder, here on the Payoff Pitch podcast, follow me in the Action Network app, read my content when it drops on actionnetwork.com. And I made sure to tweet out, or not even tweet out, I made sure to put a bet alert in the Action Network app when those articles came out, because the Yankees were one of my favorite win total unders at 93.5. Now the market across the board getting closer to 88. I don't even know if that 91.5 consensus that, Mike mentioned off the top is where the market is anymore, because in the past day, I've seen as low as 88.5, 89.5 on the Yankees. You can still find 90.5, but it's juiced. I think 90.5 at the Canby books, 90.5 juiced at ESPN. I would take it down to 90 at this point. I'm at 80, where I was at 88.6 on the Yankees before the Garrett Cole injury news. But I do think this is just a demonstrably worse team than they had coming into last year. And I think the injury risk, even with the guys who aren't hurt yet, remains substantial. Think about Jazz Chisholm. He has a torn UCL. He may need to move from third base to second base. He's never stayed healthy at any point throughout his career until last year. Max Fried has dealt with arm injuries the past couple of years. The Yankees gave him a free agent contract. Now with Cole going down, they need innings for Max Fried. And Fried remains an injury risk in his own right. Aaron Judge, Google Aaron Judge toe for me. Just go ahead and do it. You can find plenty of articles talking about him saying he'll need to manage that injury for the rest of his career. He had good luck with it last year. All it takes is one pitch hitting his foot in order for that toe to start aggravating and him to start missing time. And when the Yankees lineup didn't have Aaron Judge 2 years ago, that 6-week stretch without him, they were a bottom 10 offense in baseball. So there remains substantial injury risk on this roster. Devin Williams, the back injury, that's something that can easily crop up again. Lost Juan Soto, lost Clay Holmes, both to the Mets. Clay Holmes looks phenomenal in spring training. He's added a couple pitches to his arsenal. Never mind just the direction that the season is going, and already seems like it's going with all the injuries. But if Juan Soto wins the NL MVP and Clay Holmes is an NL Cy Young candidate, Yankees fans' heads are going to explode even more than they already have. I know they just extended Aaron Boone. Them missing the playoffs the year after extending Aaron Boone would feel super fitting, considering how the fan base generally feels about him. Maybe Brian Cashman, if they miss the playoffs this year, maybe that's the end of his tenure. But to me, there's significant downside risk with this roster. Just think, and this is the other perspective, right? I'm talking about all the injury risk here, the guys who may miss time, the fact that they don't really have anybody at the high end of their farm system aside from Jason Dominguez who's likely to give them time this year. Who gets better on this roster? aside from Jason Dominguez. Maybe Anthony Volpe turns into a little bit of a better hitter, but everybody else in their roster is essentially peaked. Maybe you get some good at-bats from Bennett Rice this year, at DH. Like, the back end of their lineup, the bottom two hitters in their lineup could be zeros. Paul Goldschmidt is 38 years old. The history of 38-year-old first baseman producing at the major league level is very narrow. Just in general, I think there's a lot of downside on this Yankees roster. Marcus Stroman is their number 3 starter going into the year. The bullpen may take a step back, especially if Devin Williams gets hurt again. Like, up and down this Yankees roster, I see risk, and I see very little upside in terms of guys improving over the past couple of years. So I love this under at 93.5. I still like it at 90.5, down to about 90. But again, I'm going to rerun my numbers, assuming Cole won't play this year. I'm going to get my numbers updated in the article on actionnetwork.com. We'll do that within the next few days. And then maybe I'll have an even lower price target on the Yankees. But right now, under down to 90. You can find some 90.5s out there. And to miss the playoffs, I would take it plus 250 or better. I was at minus 234 before the Cole news. I'd imagine I'm closer to plus 180 to plus 200 now on them to miss. So, yeah, under in Yankees miss. And honestly, 90.5, probably my favorite bet on the board, considering just the direction this roster's headed.
What's fun about parachuting into this baseball universe is so much is quantifiable in this sport that transcends really any other sport that we cover here at the Action Network. You can get so deep into the weeds, but to play an under and to miss the playoffs, and you just mentioned it with Cashman, if he feels like his job's at risk, they have all this money, they have the opportunity and the flexibility to move prospects to try to improve this roster. When it comes to that human element of, I need to save my job and certainly to make the playoffs or at least to be right in the race down the stretch, how much does that play into, what you're envisioning for what this team looks like in August and September?
That's a very fair point. Aaron Judge is 33 years old. The window for him being the AL MVP is 3 more years, probably at most, if you're lucky 2. And if injuries hit him, maybe 0. So you only have so much time to mess around with, where Aaron Judge is one of the 2 best baseball players on the planet. At some point, he will start to decline and will get overtaken by somebody else and become more of a top 5 or top 10 player. But right now, he's still one of the most impactful players in the world, and it's difficult to waste that window. But that said, Garrett Cole's probably not coming back this year. So what do? They go out and trade all the prospects they have for Sandy Alcantara or something like that, Dylan Cease, to shore up their rotation. Is that even enough to make you a World Series contender? Not in my opinion. Adding one guy at this point isn't going to fix the holes they have. Maybe if Heel comes back, and Stanton comes back, and then you add Alcantara to the roster, yeah, maybe then they're in World Series contention again. But by and large, I think the Dodgers are better than everybody else. I think the AL in general is wide open. I think the AL East, as we'll continue to talk about, is super duper wide open. I think any of these 5 teams can win the division. But as you mentioned, the Yankees, are a team that's going to continue to spend. Brian Cashman not going to sit on his hands and play out a season where the Yankees miss the playoffs again, probably after doing it 2 years ago. So in the aggregate, I just don't love the moves that they made. And, Goldschmidt, Bellinger, that's not replacing Juan Soto in the aggregate. That's just finding the best available options you could at the time. And I just don't like the construct of this roster. I really think there's a chance they finish close to a 500 team.
If they do finish closer to 500 team, I'm intrigued to hear which teams you're going to be playing to win the East, because there's a couple right there. If things break, properly, if they are buyers at the trade deadline, if they stay healthy. Let's start with the Baltimore Orioles, who finished second last year with 91 wins. They're plus 270 to win the AL East here in 2025. Make the playoffs last year, quick exit 0-2 against Kansas City. And then, overall, when you look at this franchise, it's a baseball town, but they're still trying to chase their first AL pennant since 1983. So it has been a minute since the O's have really been able to punch through, not only in the East, but also do serious damage in the postseason. Their win total for 2025 sitting at 87.5. Talk to me about the Orioles.
So divisionally, I project value on this team to win the AL East. There's a lot of hitting talent there, but everybody looks at the rotation and says, how the hell is this team going to pitch their way to the postseason? Because the assets do seem to be somewhat mismanaged, and the offseason they became worse. Lost Corbin Burns, lost Anthony Santander, replaced Santander with Tyler O'Neill, tried to replace Burns with Charlie Morton and Tomoyuki Sugano, and I think Sugano is going to be a pretty good pitcher. This guy's a former I think he's a two-time Sawamura Award winner, which is the Japanese equivalent of the Cy Young. I think he won 3 MVPs in Japan as well. His stuff isn't nearly as good as it used to be. He's 35 now, but he had a walk rate of about 2% in Japan last year. This guy just pounds the zone. And Baltimore should actually be a pretty decent defensive team, which is part of the reason I like them. They have a really good offensive position player group, but that actually project really well defensively and on the base pass too. Even guys like Colton Cowser, who seems like this big, powerful dude, he can run really well. Gunnar can run pretty well, considering how much power he has. So offensively, this team's going to need to just hit a ton to make the playoffs and get decent starting pitching. And then I think their bullpen should be much better than it was last year. Felix Bautista coming back off of injury. Bautista is my favorite saves leader bet at 25-1. I think you can take that down to 20-1. He should be healthy for opening day. I have much less concern about a pitcher coming off of Tommy John closing than I do starting pitching in terms of workload for an entire season. And I think they're going to need to use the bullpen very aggressively throughout the year in order to lock down games, potential slugfest, but games where they have tight leads late. And I think the bullpen is going to have to be a huge driver of their success this season, considering, you view the starting rotation at best as like a league average rotation, if not a bottom 10 rotation in baseball, potentially. Grayson Rodriguez hurt over the weekend. They may lose him for the entire year. Grayson's one of my favorite pitchers. In baseball, he was phenomenal down the stretch after he came off the IL last season, carried an ERA in the mid-2s. He looked like a Cy Young contender coming into this year. I think there's a chance that lose him for the entire year. So significant injury potential there with Grayson. In terms of spending money, and as you said with the Yankees, this is not a team who's been aggressive in the trade market or been aggressive in free agency. And they have a new owner. And I mentioned last year that this new owner, based upon his business history, may not be a guy who's just going to go out and spend money right away. He seemed to be more about efficiency and investing, and they haven't spent any money. They let Corbin Burns walk. They, as I said, effectively traded like Santander's contract for Tyler O'Neill's contract. I think that's a downgrade. So, the direction of the spending, the direction of the aggression is not what I like to see from a team in the competitive window that they should be in. But that said, they still have plenty of offensive prospects who, if they decide to go out and, again, trade for a Sandy Alcantara or Dylan Cease, something like that, because both the Yankees and the Orioles could use the top 10 starting pitcher, the Orioles have many, many, many more assets than the Yankees or any other teams to go out and consolidate extra hitting for pitching. I think they have plenty of assets if they want to go ahead and do that. We just haven't seen them actually pull the trigger. They could have gone after Garrett Crochet last year. There was another high-end starting pitcher that was on the block. They could have gone after him. They just haven't been super aggressive in pursuing those guys. Oh, it was Tarek Skubal. Tarek Skubal was on the block for the Tigers. And they were actually in play for Tarek Skubal and didn't pull the trigger. And then Detroit had that monster second half where they ended up making the playoffs. But Skubal to the Orioles seemed like it was going to happen at one point last year, and they just weren't willing to give up the prospects to do it. And I don't know if Jackson Holliday or whoever was, included in the deal. Maybe the ask was too much. But the point is, they have the prospects to add the pitching. They just need to go out and actually optimize the roster at some point. So the consensus projection put the Orioles at about plus 250 to win the division. I'm fine taking them at 3-1 or better. There's a team we're going to talk about next, though, who, if you don't have any bets on this division, I think you can wait a week and probably fire and get the best number. The last thing I want to mention for the Orioles, Gunnar Henderson, along with Grayson, may not be healthy to start the year, but Gunnar, a much more minor injury. I think if he misses time, he'll only miss about a week. If Gunnar is there on opening day, Gunnar to be the major league runs leader, I think is a great bet. 16-1 would bet that down to about 11-1. He was the runs leader in the first half of last season. Then the Orioles offense took a step back in the second half. Rutschman got hurt. They had some guys just slumping, etc. But Gunnar to lead the league in runs after doing it over the first half of last season, I think he projects 5th for this season. I have him winning the runs title about 8% of the time. So 11-1 or better on Gunnar to be the runs leader. Just make sure he's going to be ready for opening day.
If you don't like the penny pinching going on Utah Street, could I interest you in a team with a top 10 payroll? That's the Boston Red Sox. They're plus 420 to win the AL East. Played 500 ball last year, a third place finish. It is 3 straight years without a winning record and without making the postseason, which is a bit shocking, talking about a team that has been so invested and has had so much success in the last 2 decades. Their win total coming in here in 2025 sitting at 86.5. 8.5. Talk to me about the Red Sox, where you think they are on opening day, and are they potentially buyers to improve if the Yankees stumble out of the starting blocks?
So I'm towards the higher end of the projection market on the Red Sox. I'm close to 86 wins, but on average, the market or the public projections say there's value on the Red Sox to miss the playoffs or to go under their win total. I disagree with that. And in terms of player development, I think this is the best team on both sides of the ball. Like if you're telling me in baseball, average out, rank every team 1 through 30 in pitching development, rank every team 1 through 30 in hitting development, average those two numbers out, I think the Red Sox might be ahead of everybody else. And they have one of the best farm systems in baseball, probably partially because of that, because they've been drafting position players with decent, well-rounded skill sets, and then through bat speed training have been increasing their power internally, which is kind of a new development overall in terms of player development, using weighted bat training, figuring out a way to get more power into prospects who already have good contact skills or good speed or good defense. They're increasing hitter potential. And then their pitching development, I think, is super interesting too. You saw with the Red Sox last year, as a team strategically, they just weren't throwing four-seam fastballs. They took a completely different approach from the rest of the league. I think eventually teams did catch on to that. They started changing their approach. You know, you do have to put a different swing on the ball when you're getting a four-seamer as opposed to a sinker. Well, if nobody on the team is throwing four-seamers and everybody's throwing sinkers, eventually you can adjust probably to that approach a little bit easier. So maybe see some more four-seamers from some of their pitchers this year. I don't know. I don't know what their plan is for pitching in 2025, but I do like to see them take a more of a unique approach, you know, and significantly adjust the arsenals of some guys they've been bringing in. And I'm curious to see what they do with Garrett Crochet and Walker Buehler, both of whom they brought in to shore up their starting rotation. I mean, Crochet has legitimate Cy Young potential. I know he's super short in the Cy Young market, but I also like him for Major League K leader if he gets about 170 innings this year. I think he finished with 145 last season across 32 starts, but the White Sox weren't using him that aggressively. The concern is just workload, because prior to last year, his previous career high in innings was in college, and that was like 65 at Tennessee. He wasn't really able to stay healthy throughout the minors. He throws super hard. But the Red Sox are adding pitches to his arsenal, and this guy could be like completely unhittable if they found a way to optimize his arsenal even further than what he was doing last year, because in terms of strikeout rate and in terms of fewest pitches generated per strikeout, Garrett Crochet was at the top of the league. There was nobody better. So how do you make the most efficient guy in baseball even more efficient? Then you're talking about something crazy in terms of a season-long line, right? Like something that Jacob deGrom is only capable of getting to over a full season workload. So Crochet has unlimited potential, but that said, the injury risk remains pretty substantial, but the lineup should be able to carry them like the Orioles lineup does throughout much of the year. And I prefer the Red Sox pitching. So, you know, on paper, not like paper projections, but on paper, like just looking at the rosters top to bottom, I prefer the Red Sox to the Orioles over the full season. Just the math prefers the Orioles. So here's what you do with the Red Sox. The Red Sox have a 7-game road trip to start the year. They go to Texas for 4, they go to Baltimore for 4, then they come home. And they're probably going to have to face DeGrom in that Texas series. Like, that's not an easy series to start the year. Maybe you don't like the Orioles as much. That's fine. Then they come home, though. They have a 7-game homestand, 6-game homestand with the Cardinals and the Jays. Then they go to the White Sox, they go to the Rays, and then they come home for the White Sox again. Wait 7 days, wait for that road trip to expire, bet the Red Sox before their home game, their Friday home game against the Cardinals, 6-game homestand, then they get the White Sox twice in the span of a week. That's the Red Sox are going to pick up some free wins against the White Sox. Coming into that home series, you know, they should start playing a little bit better. It's just a tough road trip to start the year. I think if you want to wait, as you said, you know, in terms of waiting for a better number to float up on the Dodgers in the NL West, right? If they start slow, I think it's almost a certainty that the Red Sox number will improve before April 4th, and you could just go ahead and bet them to win the division, to win the AL pennant, etc. You know, after 3 days in April, you make it the peak price on Boston, and this team is going to get better as the year goes on too. You know, they have to figure out roster optimization. They have Roman Anthony, Marcelo Mayer, Christian Campbell, all basically close to Major League ready, if not Major League ready. But they went out and signed Alex Bregman, which creates no room for any of those guys to play unless like Trevor Story struggles or, you know, another infielder gets hurt. So there's a logjam of playing time they're going to have to figure out amongst all these position players, not very dissimilar from the Orioles logjam that they had coming into last year. but that means they have pieces that they can trade for other pieces that they'll ultimately need. And maybe the bullpen is the one area you're going to need to upgrade on this team. And they certainly have the assets to do it. So yeah, Red Sox I'll like better more as the year goes on. And I think if I'm taking a long shot team to win the NL or win the AL pennant at this point, it probably is Boston, because I expect them to peak at the end of the year.
We now turn to a team that's at least intriguing from a price perspective, close to 10-1, plus 950 in many of the markets. That's the Tampa Bay Rays. Losing season last year, fourth place finish. They finished 80-82, broke their postseason streak of 5 straight trips. Now they move their home field to Steinbrenner Field. We'll see how that impacts both their pitching and hitting throughout the season. Their win total sitting at 81.5, and a lot of noise surrounding this team. Is Stu Sternberg going to sell the franchise? So, with all that being said, that doesn't impact necessarily what's going on between the lines. So, how are you viewing the Rays? And do you think there's value for them to turn it around and play closer to their 2022 version as opposed to what we saw last year in 2024?
Yeah, there's a lot of upside on this roster, too. I'm actually just not sure they have the depth that they typically do. The Rays normally grind you down over 162 with plenty of depth. They have more top-end talent coming back this year. Junior Caminero looks like he could be a potential star. Shane McClanahan coming off injury. Drew Rasmussen coming off injury. Those guys, got back into games at the end of the year, so they should be okay for 2025. But if they get hurt, I don't really know if they have the depth to end up being a playoff team. But if this roster stays together, I think they do have the upside to make an AL pennant run. And 31 and win the AL pennant, worth a poke. Plus 230, down to about plus 200 to make the playoffs, worth a poke. I projected closer to plus 180. And if you're interested in their odds to win the AL East, I'm not going to argue against it. I think there is projection value, public projection value out there on it. There's just other teams in this division I prefer. But if the Rays make a wild card, they have the pitching to make a run in October. And I think their hitting should be a little bit better than it has been in years past, with Caminero getting a full season from Josh Lowe, maybe Brendan Lau finally not getting hurt in a year. So yeah, overall, I do think it's a better Rays team than they had coming into last season. And I like them coming into last year to peak towards the end of last season. They ultimately didn't get their win total high enough where they were like even in contention by the time they started getting healthy guys back. I think they finished under 500. But those guys who I expected to come back at the end of 2025, including 2024, including Shane Baz, they all made it back by the end of the year, and they're all seemingly primed for 2025. So yeah, I think the Rays are a team that's going to outplay expectations this year, as they typically do. Historically, prior to last season, the Rays exceeded their average win total by about 9 wins every single season. This is a team that's always going to overperform expectations. They're incredibly well run, but I don't see the win total upside for this year. I think at best they win like 85, 86 games, get into a low-end wild card slot, and then make a run from there. So keep an eye on this team throughout the year. I think they are a actual AL pennant contender. It's just such a tough division, and I don't know if they have the depth to win 90-plus games over 162.
When you discuss the AL East, you have the financial limitations of a team like Tampa, certainly of the Orioles, how aggressive they're going to be. And then you turn to the bottom, at least from a futures perspective, Toronto at 13-1. They're a top 5 baseball payroll squad, in 2025. It's wild how much money they have on the books, which I think creates some interesting dynamics. Namely, could they potentially move Vlad Guerrero Jr. and not necessarily in a we're throwing up the white flag situation, because he will be a free agent next offseason, but perhaps to upgrade at other places on this roster. Now, they only won 74 games last year. They finished last in the division, but between 2015 and 2023, they had 5 postseason berths. So do you think they can turn it around after last year really being lost in the wilderness? And if they do, how much of their potential is tied to their opening day roster vis-a-vis what they can do in terms of trades and acquisitions?
Yeah, so this Jays ownership group is actually the second wealthiest in baseball behind Steve Cohen. And it's not like they didn't spend money this offseason. They were very aggressive trying to sign Juan Soto. They ended up ultimately reallocating that money to Anthony Santander, Max Scherzer, Jeff Hoffman. So pitching should be slightly upgraded. Scherzer looked really good in spring. Hoffman had some medical issues. Multiple teams ultimately didn't sign him. Traded Spencer Horvitz for Andres Jimenez, and that should continue to make Toronto one of the best defensive teams in baseball. They've actually performed by defensive runs saved, outs above average, as one of the best defensive teams in baseball for the past couple of years. Have a really had a really good defensive outfield with Kevin Kiermaier in there. I know he's not there anymore, but defensively, this team should still be strong. The questions are what they get out of Bo Bichette, who took a significant step back last year while dealing with injuries, and whether they play well enough to retain Vladimir Guerrero Jr., because Guerrero is a pending free agent at the end of this season. All rumors out there now, very similar to what we heard last year with Juan Soto. Juan Soto was eventually, inevitably going to be a Met. It kind of seems at this point like Vladimir Guerrero Jr., if he does not re-sign with the Jays, may inevitably become a Met and end up in Queens as well. And the Mets will have their WBC roster formation for 2026 with Soto and Vlad Guerrero Jr. and Francisco Lindor all clogging up the middle, representing their clubs on an international stage. So I think there's downside risks certainly with this Jays roster. Scherzer is there, right? But he could easily be a trade chip for this team if they're playing closer to 500. But just looking around the rest of the AL East, looking at this roster top to bottom, you can't tell me that this Toronto team is out of contention at the start of the year. And the math completely agrees with that. In the aggregate, the projection systems say there is projection value on the Jays to win the division, to win the World Series, etc. I don't love the roster just because of the bullpen. I think the bullpen has severe chance to hinder them like it did last season. They couldn't hold any leads that they were getting early, but I like the starting rotation. It should continue to give them basically a league average start or better every single day. I know Kevin Gausman took a step back last year, but it's a relatively deep and effective rotation, even if there's no like direct Cy Young candidate on it, or even anybody you'd view better than like a number 2 starter, number 3 starter. But 1 through 5, they should get good starts. I like their lineup. I like their lineup defensively. The bullpen just gives me a significant pause. And as I said, the fact that if they start out slowly, they have guys who they're very likely to trade, including Vlad. And I think that Vlad shopping spree or the bidding war could come very close to where the Soto bidding war was a few seasons ago, because there's a number of teams who could use a big injection of power in their lineup. Think about the Giants, right? And the Giants' need for a first baseman or upgrading offensively. Vlad makes a ton of sense there, but is he going to want to go to the West Coast even for a brief period of time? It's not like he has the chance to block a trade like that, but if a guy's unhappy and going to be unhappy on a team that's trading for him, that's certainly going to hinder his performance down the stretch. So I think there's just a lot of potential for Vlad to get moved, or a lot of potential for the Blue Jays to drastically exceed expectations and end up making a playoff run. In terms of Vlad bets, betting him from a player perspective, hits leader, RBI leader, AL MVP, there's value in all 3 of those categories. I projected him around 10% for hits leader. He finished 3rd last season, but he was the second half hits leader. He had 91 in 63 games. That was ahead of Witt, who actually had 86 in 64 games. So he can maintain a very high hit pace. He's obviously playing for a big contract, the biggest contract of his career. So you're not going to see anybody possibly more locked in. I'm not a big contract year believer guy, but I mean, he has every incentive to be locked in every single day of the season, even if the Blue Jays are struggling. The other bet I should mention, RBI leader. He's only actually finished in the top 10 once for RBI, but based upon where he projects, his floor is super safe. And if this Jays lineup takes a step up relative to where it was last season, I think he could finish in the top 5 pretty comfortably. And injury luck from there get him to the top. So 35-1 RBI leader, not as enticing as hits leader at 16-1, but AL MVP at 18-1. I think Vlad could have a monster year if he doesn't get traded. Just he may get traded out of the league, and then you lose that bet. So that's the downside to the MVP bet. Hits leader, RBI leader, doesn't matter what your league you're playing in, you just have to finish the top of the league. So of those 3 bets, I prefer Vlad hits leader. If you can get an over on the Jays at 78.5 or better, I would consider taking that as well. I'm at 83.1. Pacoda is at 84.6. Other projections are below that, but everybody has this team winning at least 79 games. So taking an over 78.5, every projection still says they go over that total.
With Major League Baseball right around the corner, now is the perfect time to get yourself an Action Pro account. Get real-time alerts from experts like Sean Zerillo, access Sean Kerner's strikeout prop projections, and more. Right now, new subscribers can get $20 off a year of Action Pro at actionnetwork.com/pro and use promo code POD20. That's promo code POD20 for $20 off an entire year, so you'll be covered for March Madness, the upcoming Major League Baseball season, plus next season's college football and NFL seasons as well. So don't wait. Visit actionnetwork.com/pro right now and use promo code POD20 to get $20 off a year of Action Pro. All right, that leaves us here at the end of the division previews, our final allotment of your favorite bets here. We're going to go through win totals, favorite stat leaders, and your best bet here in the division.
Favorite win total, the New York Yankees under. I would bet that down to about 90 for now. As I said, I will update my projections on actionnetwork.com with my updated win total, the updated public win totals. The public market has moved from around 87 to 92 wins on this team to about 84 to 89, 84 to 88. So you can see that adjustment downward of about 2-3 wins since the Garrett Cole injury news dropped over the weekend. I do think ultimately I'll end up setting a price target of about 89.5, 89, but there are some 90.5s out there that you can still pick off. As I mentioned, the 3 Canby books, 4 Canby books on top of ESPN Bet all have the Yankees at 90.5. So bet the 90.5 or higher to the under, and then bet the Yankees to miss the playoffs at plus 250 or better. May end up lowering that as well, closer to plus 225. I think I'll end up making that about plus 180 in terms of a fair projection. But Yankees under, Yankees to miss the playoffs, my favorite team bets here. Stat leaders, both the Oriole players. So Felix Bautista, 25-1 for saves leader, bet down to 20-1. Gunnar Henderson, 16-1 for runs leader, bet to 11-1. Just make sure that Gunnar is going to be in the opening day lineup, or that it looks like he's going to be back within a few days of the start of the season. You don't want to bet a guy on Major League runs leader who's going to end up missing the first 2 weeks of the season and then could ultimately get another IL stint, from some point forward after that. But if he's only going to play 155 games, it certainly lowers the value on that number. The best bet for this division, wait 7 days and bet the Red Sox. That's pretty much it. They have that seven-game road trip to start the year. They come home, play St. Louis, and then they get 6 games against the White Sox in the next week after that. So I think the Red Sox are ultimately going to be the surprise team. Not the surprise team, because everybody views them as like the surprise darling. I think it's going to happen, but I just think you'll get a better number if you wait a week. So wait a week on the Red Sox, then start taking various positions divisionally, pennant, and then World Series if you're feeling a little bit crazier.
That'll do it for this episode of Payoff Pitch. We've now completed all 6 division previews, so go back through your podcast feed, listen to all 6 of those, and if you're looking for the most up-to-date information, go into the Action Network app, follow Sean Zerillo, and you can go through all of his best bets that are updated with injury news, player movements, market movement, everything to keep you in the black throughout this season. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to all of our division previews and the Payoff Pitch podcast as a whole. 5-star reviews are incredibly appreciated. For Sean Zerillo, I'm Mike Calabrese. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Payoff Pitch.